welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are the Commander staples that I will be putting in my Azorius Commander decks. So this is the final 2-color pairing that I will be talking about. I covered all the rest already. You can go check out the playlist that I have of all the staples that I've been talking about in the Commander format. So just to reiterate, because I've been doing this for almost a year now, this is basically a template. That's what I call it, right? So whenever I'm putting a deck together, and I put a lot of decks together, it makes it a lot easier for me to put the staples already in there so that I can just add all the other stuff that I want, right? Every deck is going to need card draw, you're going to need ramp, you're going to need removal, or ways to deal with what your opponents are doing. And depending on the color combination of your deck, there's probably going to be a lot of those cards that you're going to be reusing over and over again. So that's how I build decks, is I have this template in each color combination that when I put a deck together, I already got that stuff ready to go. Makes it a lot easier for me to build a deck, but also it makes sure I don't forget really great cards in those certain color combinations, right? It just really helps with the deck building process. And as always, whenever you're putting these color combinations together, you got to be thinking about, okay, well, what does this color combination do well and what does it maybe not do well? White and blue doesn't have a lot of downsides. Of course, typically is known as control colors. In the Commander format, though, maybe not as much. Like when you think of blue and white, a lot of times you're thinking of blinking decks. There's a lot of blinking decks in white and blue. They just recently started doing Soldier Tribal in white and blue, which is interesting. You know, if I look at the most popular commanders in the format in Azorius colors, Shirokai Genesis Engine is now the most popular by far, actually. Azorius Commander, not really a lot of control going on there. Brago, next up, is a Blink Commander. Then you got Millicent, Restless, Revenant, which is Spirit Tribal. So even though people think of white and blue as sort of the control colors, really a lot of these decks aren't doing that. However, no matter what you're doing, you certainly aren't going to have an issue dealing with whatever your opponents are doing, right? You got blue, which is going to give you those counter spells. You got white, which has all the best removal. That is not going to be a problem for you in your Azorius deck at all. So if we're getting to the actual Azorius cards, and again, sticking to the control theme, Dovin's Veto is probably one of my favorite counter spells in the format. If I'm playing a white-blue deck, it's an auto-include for me. Just white and a blue instant. This spell can't be countered. Counter target non-creature spell. And as I talk about all the time, for me, the non-creature spells are really the ones that I am going to be most concerned about. Typically, those are the ones that are either going to be just straight up ending the game as soon as they resolve, or they're just going to be a really powerful card that is going to affect the outcome of the game. You really got to be on high alert for those powerful non-creature spells. Dovin's Veto is going to get them all, and because it can't be countered, you're almost assuredly going to be able to deal with that situation. Let's talk about some more Azorius cards that could go in just about any deck. I really like Unsettled Mariner. White and a blue shapeshifter 2/2 has Changeling. So if you're in any tribal theme, I think this is a fantastic fit. Again, maybe you're doing that Spirit Tribal, maybe you're doing that Soldier Tribal. If you are, this is going to be a card that you can throw in there and it'll actually fit what you're doing. But more importantly, whenever you or a permanent you control becomes a target of spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 1. I really like abilities like this, and you know, this can be sneaky good. It depends on the kind of player you are, because your opponents will likely forget that you have this on the table. They'll go to cast their spell. When they do, this triggers, and if they don't have the extra 1 mana available, that spell will be countered. Now, if you're a really nice guy and you don't want to be a stickler for the rules in your casual commander group, you can just say, okay, well, you didn't know about it. We'll just pretend that never happened. Or you can be the guy that is a stickler for the rules, and that spell will actually be countered because they didn't have the 1 mana to pay for it. Either way, this is just a great card that's going to sit there and help protect yourself and your whole team. Scheming Fence is a fantastic one that I really like that came out in New Capenna that you could put in literally any deck and it's going to be doing work for you. White and a blue human citizen 2/3. As it enters the battlefield, you may choose a non-land permanent. Activated abilities of the chosen permanent can't be activated. Scheming Fence has all activated abilities of the chosen permanent except for loyalty abilities. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate those abilities. This is something that is always going to occur in every commander game, and you know, you can use this card in a bunch of different ways. Maybe your opponent has an Isochron Scepter combo or something. This is just a way that you can shut it off. Now, of course, you can use the activated ability yourself, but more importantly, this is a way to shut off some really powerful activated ability your opponents have. Of course, it can be their commander. There's a lot of commanders out there with really powerful activated abilities, and your opponent won't be able to use it, but also you can use it yourself. So if your opponent has a non-land permanent with a really neat, interesting activated ability, maybe they got an Arcanist the Omnipotent, not only are you not allowing them to use it, but now you get to use it yourself. Just a really fun card in a commander game, I think. Vanish into Memory is a card I've talked about on my channel quite a bit. I absolutely love it. I will try not to go on a huge diatribe here. I will actually point you guys to the last video I did, which I talked about it, which was 5 cards that should see more commander play, where I go over all the different instances of where this card can be great. It's great in a blinking theme. It's great in a situation where you just need to deal with one of your opponent's creatures in a pinch. It'll get that off the table temporarily. It can be a great option for drawing cards. It's just one of those cards that might not exactly fit the theme of what you're doing, but it is such a versatile card that you would be surprised how many different ways you can use it. I love this card. Go check out that video if you want to hear me go off about how many ways you can use this card. Disorder in the Court is one that sort of flew under the radar for me for a while, and I saw one of my patrons actually use it in a game, and I'm like, man, that card's actually pretty good. X, white, and a blue instant. Exile X target creatures, then investigate X times, return the exiled cards to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So one of the things about this card that I sort of missed is it is exile X target creatures. So again, similar to Vanish into Memory, where I can use this to blink my own creatures, so it's great in a blink strategy, but also it's a way to get your opponent's troublesome creatures off the board temporarily, because of course they're being returned at the beginning of the next end step. So your opponent's swinging with that Blightsteel Colossus, they're about to kill you, you can just pay 3 mana and exile that Blightsteel Colossus, get it off the table so that you don't die. It can be nice to have cards like that in a pinch can save your life. It also is a great way to get your cards off the table if you plan on board wiping, right? So let's say I got 3, I exile my 3 creatures for 5 mana, I get to investigate 3 times as well, which is pretty good. And then because they don't return until the beginning of the next end step, I can do this on my opponent's end step, right? You got to be careful with the timing here. On my opponent's end step, right before my turn, I exile all my creatures. Then on my turn, my creatures are still exiled because they're not returning until my end step. So now I can board wipe, destroy everyone else's creatures, and then on my end step, they come back into play, and I'm the only one with creatures. And then again, I get to investigate as well. Pretty great versatile card, I think, in a commander game. Another very versatile, interesting card, Fractured Identity. This is one that when it first came out in C17, I saw quite a bit. Hardly ever see it anymore. It's just a really interesting, fun card in a commander game. 3 white and a blue sorcery. Exile target non-land permanent. That's pretty good. But then each player, other than its controller, creates a token that's a copy of it. So this can make for some really interesting shenanigans. You can exile your opponent's commander, and then everyone else gets one, right? This is a great way to stick it to that guy who wants to play a Vorinclex deck or something like that. I'm going to exile your Vorinclex, and then everyone else gets one. That makes things pretty interesting for sure. You can get into some really neat shenanigans with this card, like with Phage. Famously, people do this. So you exile your Phage, all your opponents get a Phage, and of course, because it entered the battlefield without being cast, they lose the game, so it just becomes a win con. It's just a really neat, very unique, interesting card in a commander game that can be used in a lot of different ways. And again, I think you could probably put this in any deck, and at some point during the game, you're going to find a very interesting way to use it. Cloud Cover is a really great one. 2 white and a blue enchantment. Whenever another permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may return that permanent to owner's hand. So this is going to include abilities as well, which can be really important. And it gives you the option, right? You may return that permanent to owner's hand. This is going to include all your permanents, even your lands. So maybe you have a really powerful land in play that your opponent is going to want to get rid of with their strip mine. They're targeting your permanent with their ability. So rather than have it destroyed, you can just return it to your hand and then replay it again on the next turn. Really fantastic, underrated way, I think, to protect your stuff. And again, works extra good in that blink strategy because, of course, you're just going to replay that card and probably get the ETB off of it again, right? Really great card in a commander game. Some commanders that, interestingly enough, can fit in literally any commander deck. Grand Arbiter Augustine IV, 2 white and a blue. Human Advisor, 2/3. White spells you cast cost 1 less. Blue spells you cast cost 1 less. Spells your opponents cast cost 1 more. I know this is not a very fun card. As a commander, it's super annoying, but you can very easily sneak this into the 99 of your decks, I think, and you're not going to be as big of a target as if you had this as your commander, obviously, because if this is your commander, everyone's going to think you're playing that stack strategy. Just the I reduce all my spell costs by 1 less or possibly 2 less if it's a 2-color spell is really fantastic in any Azorius deck, right? So it's very easy to sneak this guy into the 99 of your decks, throw this guy down on like turn 4 or 5, your opponents aren't going to to be ready for it. All their spells are going to cost one more. All yours are going to be costing one less. Just seems like great value. Linvala, Shield of Seagate is a really interesting one that, again, I completely ignored as a commander right out of the gate because I didn't think of it was very good, and started to realize it's pretty great in the 99 of decks. 1 white and a blue Angel Wizard 3/3 with flying. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, choose target non-land permanent opponent controls until your next turn. It can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. So as a commander, not great. You need that whole full party thing. The party mechanic I don't particularly love. It's really difficult to do, and even if you pull it off, the payoff here isn't great. But if we just completely ignore that ability and look at the last ability, this works really, really great in the 99 of a lot of decks. Sacrifice Linvala, choose hexproof or indestructible creatures you control gain that ability until end of turn. This is just great board wipe protection for your team if you're in any sort of a go wide strategy here. Doesn't cost any mana to activate. All you have to do is sacrifice your Linvala. It's doing that selfless spirit sort of effect, but also is giving the hexproof as well, right? Sometimes indestructible isn't going to work against like a Swords to Plowshares or something like that. This gives hexproof as well. So worst case scenario, I can just sacrifice this to protect my commander from getting removed by giving it hexproof. I just think this is a great card in the 99 of a lot of Azorius decks. Danik, Pious Apprentice is a really great card in the 99 of a lot of decks. I was thinking about this as I was putting this video together. Of course, I have a Danik deck, so Danik's the commander of that deck. But as a card in the 99, I think this is a fantastic fit, mostly because it is a two-sided card, and I can play either side. So the front side says cards in graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities, so that's a fantastic fit in a lot of decks. Obviously, if you're not doing that, right? If you're not in a graveyard theme, you can just throw this down and it can be a graveyard hate card against any of your opponents that are playing a graveyard deck. If they're not, that's fine. You just throw this guy down. It's a 2/3 with lifelink, and when it dies, you can disturb it from your graveyard. And when you disturb it from your graveyard, whenever more creature cards are put into graveyards from anywhere, investigate. This ability triggers only once each turn. And as I've pointed out so many times about my Danik deck, you don't even need to build around that ability. Creature cards are going into graveyards from anywhere all the time in commander games, whether it be creatures dying, people discarding creatures, creatures being milled into graveyards, right? Anytime a creature card is going to a graveyard, you're going to get to investigate. And investigate is essentially drawing, right? Because you just pay 2 mana, sacrifice a draw card. So this can be a really nice draw engine in a lot of decks. Just really great value. I think you could put Danik in the 99 of just about any deck, and it's going to be doing lots of work for you. Really great card. And I'm going to end off with Supreme Verdict, which is probably the most Azorius staple there has been in the Commander format for as long as I've been playing the format anyway. It is still one of the most popular board wipes in the entire format, even though I don't necessarily think it should be. It's funny because I'm ending with a card that I actually don't ever play, but it is still a Commander staple, and it is a pretty good card. So a 4 mana sorcery speed board wipe, destroy all creatures is pretty good. I think the part that people really like about this is it can't be countered. And as I've pointed out many times before, I just find that the deck that's playing a lot of counter spells isn't playing a go wide strategy, so maybe as a board wipe it's not super fantastic because those two things don't play into each other that much. I guess if you're against that Azorius deck that isn't a go wide strategy like the Spirit Tribal or the Soldier Tribal, funny enough, it is going to work great there. I typically find that there's just a lot of other board wipes that are going to give me an advantage, like By Invitation Only or Austere Command or something like that. Those board wipes will give me an advantage where I can save some of my creatures rather than just I destroy all creatures. That's sort of my thinking about it, but it is still a really good board wipe in the Commander format, so of course I gotta give it a mention. But that is it. That is all my Commander staples for Azorius decks. Just helping you guys build those Commander decks. That's what I've always been doing on this channel since its inception. And if there's some interesting cards here that maybe you've never seen before that you were thinking of putting in your Azorius decks, I do have a TCG player link. Give it a click. It helps support the channel. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.